Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Drew from Enjoy Hoi Polloi. Here with some ideas to help you make music, make it better, get it out, and get it heard. So I'm here in my home studio today to talk to you about my 10 tips for new and returning producers. These are ideas that I've come up with over the last 3 or 5 years that I've implemented in my creative workflow to help me be more efficient when I'm sitting down to make music and more efficient in kind of a number of different areas in my life. So the first one I'd like to talk to you today about is the concept of Kaizen. So Kaizen is a Japanese phrase that kind of came into being after World War II. Toyota Motor Company, I believe, was responsible for kind of being the first implementation of it. I'm not sure if they came up with it. And by the way, I'm not an expert in any of this, but this is just kind of what I've done from doing some initial Google searching on it. So the idea behind it was that you take small teams that are groups of people who do similar job tasks and get them together on a daily or weekly basis to review some of the work that they're doing and ensure that they're making continuous improvements day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, etc., to that workflow, so that they are, making a product more efficiently, making cars more gas efficient, things of that nature. So it's relevant, obviously, in the context of music production, because a lot of us who are coming back to this after a hiatus don't necessarily have the skills that we need in order to, make the music we want or be proficient and judicious in the way that we're making music. So quickly talking about Kaizen, the symbol itself in the Japanese written language of kanji, stands for two things. First off, Kai and Zen are two separate characters. Kai represents the concept of change, and Zen represents the concept of good or for the better or improvement, effectively. Each of these kanji actually has two separate pieces to it. So even within that one character, there's a kind of a duality. So on Kai, that duality kind of represents, first off, the symbol for the self, and then also a symbol for a whip. And what that signifies to me, and I think in terms of thinking in terms of the concept of Kaizen, is that you are responsible for motivating yourself to make these changes. The second portion, Zen, is made up of the symbol for an altar, the symbol for a sacrifice, and the symbol for an altar. And what this represents to me within the concept of Kaizen is that there are going to be some things you have to sacrifice, whether that's your opinion of a previous process that you've been using or your time and energy. If any of you are like me, you're a 9-to-5 work guy, person, and you got a family, you got a kid, and that all takes time. And even if you're not, even if you're a college kid coming to my channel, you've got classes you got to take, you've got responsibilities outside of that, you got a social life, you've got friends, you've got responsibilities to other people and other things in life. So Kaizen does require some sacrifice in order to make improvements to a process that you'd like to make better. So in this instance, you may have to be sacrificing some of those some energy, some money towards your goal of being a better producer and a better musician within this kind of framework of Kaizen. So what are kind of the key takeaways from this? Well, first off, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So these are gradual, minute changes that you're making to the way that you're approaching a song structure, the way that you're approaching, sound design, what have you. And these gradual changes over time will add up to making a fairly significant change to your overall process. So little improvements each day will go a long way in the long run. The other concept is, I think that's relevant to keep in mind, is that you shouldn't get into producing or really anything that requires any effort with the concept that this is going to be a short-term gain. Meaning, I started making EDM about 3 years ago, more proficiently. I did it in high school, but I started making it more regularly, rather, about 3 to 5 years ago. And in that period of time, I have significantly improved in terms of my sound design, my understanding of my DAWs, the mix down, understanding the whole process of, ideation of a creative idea to final mastering and putting it out on the net. So you don't get into producing music or really anything that takes any effort with this concept of, I'm going to put a little bit of effort in the front, get a short-term game, and I'm good. Because the idea is that you're putting in effort over the long term to make a really significant change to something that you're really passionate about. So don't put in effort and money and time and energy and expect a really quick result. But understand that this is a gradual process and we're all learning. I'm still going to be learning. You're going to see that on this channel. Again, I've been a musician for about 20 years. I've made music that's fantastic, that my fans love, that people really vibed with. And I've also been guilty of making some really shitty music over the years. So just keep that in mind and realize that even people like deadmau5 and BT and these really famous, amazing producers, Hans Zimmer, all of these folks who are great musicians whose stuff we consume, they're still learning. They're still growing, and that's kind of a process. Kaizen is not a one-time limited thing. It's a lifelong process that you put in to continuously improve your quality of life. The second idea I'd like to talk about is kind of related, and that is the concept of discipline. Being disciplined with what you do. So when I think about this in the terms of how I've implemented it into my creative process, it kind of takes two forms. First and foremost is setting aside time to do specific tasks, whether that's budgeting time to do sound design, budgeting time to focus on ideation and musical creativity, setting aside time for marketing, setting aside time for networking, etc. Bucketing your time, setting time aside to do each of those tasks individually, but then being respectful and disciplined about what you're doing during that time. So respecting those time slots and not necessarily, not sitting there playing, Stardew Valley or some shit on your phone while you're supposed to be making sounds. So again, I've talked about some of these ideas, producing, creating new songs ideas or new beat ideas, doing sound design work, creating mix downs, doing your mastering process, creating artwork for your launches, thumbnails for your YouTube videos, what have you, learning about marketing. All of these things are little pieces of the process. And if you bucket your time and be disciplined about what you're assigning to those times, you'll be more effective in doing each of those tasks individually. So actually that marketing portion is a great segue into the third item I want to talk about, and that is music marketing. Number 3 is really understanding that it's important to know how to market your music in terms of the modern music industry. When I started making music back in the Stone Age, CDs were the thing. And even before that, cassettes, LPs, vinyl, etc. There was a different frame of reference. Selling your music, selling your physical copies of your CDs was actually one of the biggest revenue drivers, maybe not for you, but definitely for your record label. Merchandise sales, selling tickets, doing live shows, and some of the other ancillary things historically have also been a good way, but really the music industry was driven by the sale of albums. And I think now it's definitely shifted over the last 20 years to a focus on singles more often than not. But also the revenue stream has changed completely. I mean, we're in the era of streaming music. So understanding what some of these aspects and the business relationship between that and the creative process is very important in terms of being a successful modern musician. There are a lot of resources for this. Obviously, there's a lot of books you can look up, things from, for example, going to your local music college and getting an understanding of what their business courses consist of, what the required reading is for those. But if you're, solely focused on looking on Instagram and YouTube to get some of this content to just, consume as a hobby musician like myself, then I would recommend a couple of different folks. So first and foremost, I'm going to make a big shout out to my boy, Andrew Southworth. Andrew is my former guitarist, and he and I have been working together on music for the better part of the last decade, off and on, starting with our bands, Feeding the Ghost and focusing in on prog metal. Now Andrew is doing more EDM production. He's kind of focused in on a lot of the future bass kind of sound. And he has been doing YouTube videos for the better part of the last decade as well, focusing in on a whole range of different things. But his YouTube content as of late is really heavily focused on marketing. And it's fantastic content. I would highly recommend you go check him out. There will be a link, the video comments below, so go check him out. Next on this list is, I think, a personal guru to both Andrew and myself, and that's Adam Ivy. This guy fucking gets it, first off. I have a background in marketing for my professional career, my 9 to 5. Adam takes some of those principles, because he also has a background in marketing, and applies it specifically to music production and music release. And his content is incredible. On top of that, he also does coaching. So if you want to have a really one-on-one relationship with somebody who's going to teach you a really good segment of the business, Adam Ivy is definitely someone to check out. Again, link to his YouTube page here below. The last one that I'll mention is someone that I've started following a little bit more recently. He's great for the marketing content and release content, but he's also really great for just motivational speaking in general. And that's Gary V. And I'm going to totally butcher his last name. And Gary, I'm sorry. I believe Vaynerchuk. This guy just gets it as well. He's blunt. He's going to be straightforward with you. And the best part is he loves to swear. He's not going to pull punches because that's who his fucking personality is based on. And as you can tell, I'm not going to pull punches on that side either. All right. So again, there's lots of other resources on the net that you can find. YouTube's a great resource. All of these things will help you better understand what it's like to identify an audience, create a product that's focused on that audience, release that product, and track your data over time so you can make, again, Kaizen, continuous improvements to your process and improving your product and improving your marketing outreach. All right, that brings me to the fourth part, and there's no segue here, and that is learning is important. I'm a lifelong learner. My background is in classical archaeology. I was planning on taking that into being a professor and actually teaching folks about archaeology while doing digs, hopefully in Greece on a nice beach somewhere with a coffee. But life paths change. The one thing that hasn't changed is that I am continually learning and trying to improve whatever skills that I'm focused on at that time. So again, there are a ton of resources for this. YouTube is absolutely invaluable. However, it's also a huge time suck. So just be careful about the amount of time that you're spending consuming content from YouTube. My recommendation and what I've done is work on something, figure out something I don't know, and then go and find the content on YouTube to identify how it is that I can fix that, learn it, apply it, tweak it if I need to. Other resources, things that I would recommend, definitely go to your local bookstore or your local college bookstore rather, and ask them what the coursework, required reading is for coursework on, music theory or mixing, what have you within their music department. The other one that I highly recommend, especially if you're into EDM and you're trying to get a better understanding of how to create sounds. And that is the Sound on Sound magazine's online articles on what's in a sound. So this series is huge. It starts off with the absolute basics: oscillation, filter, envelope. What do they mean? What is a sound? How does it work? What's in a sound wave? How do you tweak it? And how do you create maybe some specific sounds, things like guitars, pianos? I will also put a link down to that article or that series of articles below. Again, it was an invaluable resource to me when I was getting back into doing EDM and really trying to understand what synthesis was and how I can use, some of the controls on. I'm just gonna do this here so hopefully it won't fuck up. How to use some of the controls on my Sub 37 or some of my other synthesizers. Finally, within this category is Reddit. I have found Reddit to be a great community for not only learning more about music production, specific types of music production, but also for a sounding board on my own files, my own songs. And bear in mind, people will definitely not pull punches on Reddit. They'll tell you like it is typically. But the communities that I follow that I think have been really helpful are EDM production, the subreddits rather, EDM production, music production, and synth recipes, especially if you're in EDM. I would advise you to check those out as well. There's obviously subreddits for every topic known to man. So you can find the subreddit for Logic Pro production, Ableton production, FL Studio, etc. So the next tip, number 5, work on music a little bit every day. In some way, you should always be spending a few hours working on doing something related to music every day. And I understand for the modern professionals among you, that's going to be a challenge. It was for me, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. But what I want to talk about here is really trying to maximize your time management skills. I have found it incredibly helpful when I'm doing this to focus on very small pieces of projects at a time. The benefit of this is that you won't get burned out on, doing a mix or creating an 8-bar loop. The first recommendation, spend some time doing something related to your music every day. Do it in little segments, little sessions. Make sure this is on distracted time. I think that's huge, especially in our modern, completely always on, always connected society. Turn your cell phone off. Turn it on airplane mode. Don't answer it. Don't browse the internet. Just focus on the task at hand. if you're like me and you have a wife or a significant other and you have children around, make sure that you're doing this in a time that's conducive to them. Make sure you work that out and that they know and respect the fact that you're budgeting that time to focus on your music work. All right, so that brings me to number 6, and that's bucketing your time. And it's kind of, I think, complementary to what I was just saying. Totally just bumped my mic here. I gotta be careful, I keep swiping. Anyway, bucket your time. And this is, again, a time management focus. So it's easy to get distracted with all the things you need to do in order to finish a piece of music. Start with a really cool creative idea, or maybe you're rocking on a drum kit and you create a really cool beat. Bucket your time effectively so that once you get that beat, you can actually, progress through from early ideation, creating a beat, arrangement, sound design within that arrangement, mix downs, mastering, creating artwork for your release, marketing ahead of the release, your release, and actually tracking your content and following up on your data from that release so that you can make improvements to your process. So again, set aside time, bucket your time, and set aside time to do each of these pieces in part. Again, this will help you not to get burnt out on doing one specific task repetitively or doing it for a long period of time, and you're less likely to be disappointed and get frustrated with what you're doing. The next part of this is, I think, a little contentious, and that is, making sure that you're doing some of these things in isolation. So spend an hour doing, creative ideation during the week, 2 hours, whatever. Spend 2 hours doing arrangement, spend 2 hours doing mixing, but don't necessarily let them all flow into one another. And the benefit of this, again, is that you're not getting frustrated, you're focused, and you're not going to get burnt out on just doing one aspect. So perfect next step and next segue into this is number 7, finish your damn projects. I will admit that I am guilty of not doing this myself. I'm sure, like most producers, if you look at my PC or my laptop, you'll find a ton of Ableton Logic sessions that just have stupid names because I created an 8-bar loop, played around with it for a bit, and then was like, I'm bored with this, I'm gonna move on to the next thing. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge for me, and I'm sure it's a challenge for most producers. But the thing that you need to understand about finishing a project is that you can create that creative idea. You can make an 8-bar loop out of it. But if you just stop there and you say, okay, that's a cool 8-bar loop, I'm done, I'm gonna move on to the next thing, you're not actually practicing and developing your skills for say arrangement, sound design, mixing, mastering, marketing, artwork, etc. You're not developing the skills and practicing those skills if you just stop short. So you're actually selling yourself short of actually learning and continuously improving. Number 8, I think, is relative to the marketing side of things, and that's really know your audience. It's really difficult to sell a product and market a product if you really don't understand what's in the minds of the target audience that you're looking for. Perfect example of this in music, take kids who are into mid-tempo or dubstep, right? That's a very specific genre. You don't want to necessarily go sell house music to these people because they probably will think, okay, that's house music, I'm not interested, it's not something I'm into. So it's helpful to identify what your target market is in terms of a genre, but also in terms of some of the characteristics of those people. So their age, their relative geographic location. You don't want to market as a show if you're going out and DJing. You don't want to market a show in Philadelphia to people on your list that are out in LA because they're not going to be able to attend. So it's kind of pointless to put your energy into doing that. It's a lot easier to make content if you know who that content is intended for. Music has a set series of rules. For example, you want to pay attention to key, you want to pay attention to a beat. Genres have some very specific expectations in terms of the arrangements of songs, etc. So it's a lot easier to create content if you have those rules in place based on who you're trying to get that content out to. There are tons of resources, again, for all of these different kind of segments on YouTube and other areas as well. So identify your market, know your audience. And the last piece of that I think that's really relevant is that it's like, if you know your audience and you know the content you're creating for that audience, you've basically created built-in engagement. Because if you make a really sick dubstep song and you send that out to your target audience that's focused on dubstep, they're gonna eat it up because you already know that they're into that music. You already know that you're identifying that to a specific segment of EDM listeners, and you're more likely to drive engagement in that area. And you're more likely to understand the aesthetic since you know that market. So again, just know your audience. All right, so number 9 and 10 are kind of interrelated, but number 9 is taking care of yourself. I'm gonna say that again. You've got to take care of yourself. I think this is true whether you're a musician. It's true especially in the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's true especially because if you're in the United States, in the middle of this incredibly divisive political time in our history. Take care of yourself. Know yourself. Understand what your limitations are. It's very important to take care of your mental, physical, and emotional and spiritual well-being. None of those things exist in a vacuum. You've got to be focused on taking care of all of that. So get enough sleep, 7 to 9 hours a night. Huge improvement. Make sure that you're doing some sort of exercise. You absolutely don't want to be just sitting behind a monitor all day. Emotional and spiritual. So emotional health, mental health specifically, I think a lot of people have struggles with this. I think a lot of people don't talk about it. I probably won't talk about my experience with it on this video. I definitely won't. It's not kind of the focus of this content, but the one thing I will say is that everybody struggles. Everybody's got problems. Everybody experiences something in their life. They may not know it. They may not regularly identify with it. They may not talk about it with other people, but it's important to do so. And I think this will help you as a producer and as a musician for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, if you understand the emotional complexity of yourself, you can take that emotional complexity and make better music. If you understand the pain that you're going through, or you understand why you're happy and why you're sad, you can actually translate that into making better music, because that emotional connection will actually translate through to your music as well. Again, all of this will help you with, what the Greeks used to say is no thyself. That means know thyself. So take care of yourself, understand where you're coming from, and definitely watch your mental health. The spiritual aspect of this, and I always hate talking about this because so many people take it as religious. I am agnostic, atheist, I have no idea. I put a lot of credence in a lot of different things. I'm a ritualistic person. I love ritual, so I was drawn to some of the witchy paganism stuff. I lived in Salem, Massachusetts for a number of years. Spirituality is important, and at least understanding that there is probably something greater than you, whether that's science, understanding that the laws of physics exist and that's something you can't control. You can't change gravity. You can't change the fact that we're heliocentric. And yes, we are heliocentric. So if you're a flat earther, bye. Whether that's God, whether that's Buddha, whether that's, Yahweh, Cyrodiil, the green god, whatever, what have you, understanding that there's something bigger than yourself humbles you. And I think humility is a huge part of being a successful musician, because ego is one of the biggest killers of a musical career. I mean, there are myriad examples of this in the press where, some loudmouth famous musician has talked his mouth and his fans have responded by saying, yeah, you know what? We're not putting up with that. So we're not going to listen to your content anymore. So just being humble. And again, spirituality will help you be more humble. Okay. So yeah, take care of your health, mental, spiritual, physical, take care of yourself. Which leads me to number 10. And that's take a fucking break. In terms of engineering, this is very important. Ear fatigue is a real thing. If you spend 6 hours listening to the same mix over and over again, after a while, the cilia in your ears, and I'm probably not using the correct term for that, but the hair follicles within your ears will actually start to get fatigued, and they won't function and they won't be as resonant. So you'll actually start to make your mix worse because you're not hearing it correctly. You're not hearing it accurately. My recommendation, if you're working on a mix, is work on it for an hour or two, take a 15-20 minute break, rest your ears, come back to it. My recommendation is usually not to spend more than an hour or two doing mixing. And if you are, it's usually best to just set it aside and come back to it at a later point in time. I can't tell you the number of times that I've done a mix late at night, spent 3 or 4 hours on it, come back to listen to it the next morning on a reference speaker and been like, what the fuck was I doing last night? Was I fucking high? It just sounded terrible. So just be aware of that, and try to take a break when you're doing mixing, for example. The next kind of connotation to this is, obviously music is not the only thing in life. It's a very important part of my life, but it is definitely not all encompassing of my life. I think a lot of producers are guilty of this, where they spend a lot of time creating music and not actually going out and experiencing the other things in the world. If you're missing out on the experiences and the opportunities in the world around you, your music's going to suffer because you're not going to be able to convey the emotional complexity of life. So go out and live life, and then come back in and talk about it through your music. If you're like me, you're working a 9 to 5, I've already talked about having a family, having a kid. You have those responsibilities, and those are huge. I mean, my son Marlo is a source of immense joy in my life. I'll probably throw some clips in of me walking around with him this morning in our hometown. But again, it just really goes back to, engaging with your friends, engaging with your family, engaging with the world around you, because those experiences are what make music worthwhile. A lot of the best musicians had some demons, but they only had those demons, they only had those experiences because they went out and lived life before they started talking about it in their music or their art. So yeah, that's, I think your lyrical content, especially if you're a vocalist like myself, it will suffer if you are just talking about, your own personal experience, focus very heavily on your limited scope of understanding from not being outside and experiencing life. So those are my 10 tips for new and returning producers. If you found the content useful, give me a subscribe, give me a like on this video. I'd really appreciate it. You can ring that bell. I will be releasing content on a weekly basis moving forward. I'm really shooting to have most of my content released out early Saturday mornings. At this point, it's probably gonna be Saturday afternoon by the time I get this out. But again, thanks so much for taking the time to check out my channel, and keep making good music. Take it easy.